Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I have another episode for you guys of Harry Potter HEIR Slytherin Part 2 Book 2. Chapter 7. A week after the strange accident in potions, Draco and Harry were on their way to the newly formed dueling club. Weasley was ahead of them, a perfect opportunity to ambush him with another spider. Harry suggested it, but Draco declined. "It's boring," Draco said. "Too easy." Harry didn't believe it. Harry had seen Draco looking around the castle for spiders several times that day, but there were none to be found. Harry suspected that Granger had placed a subtle spider-repelling charm upon Draco, for Weasley's benefit. Dueling Club was being run by Professor Lockhart. Although Harry didn't like Lockhart much, the prospect of learning to duel was enough to lure most of the second-year students to the first meeting. Lockhart selected Weasley to give a dueling demonstration, and Draco immediately volunteered to be Weasley's opponent. The animosity between the two was palpable as they stood at opposite ends of the classroom, wands extended. Professor Lockhart was between them, arms in the air. Lockhart dropped his arms. "Begin." Harry saw Draco move before Lockhart's signal, firing a blasting curse. Weasley was completely unprepared. Weasley's wand cracked in the center, the front half sending out pitiful red sparks as it clattered to the floor. Weasley stared down at the wand fragment in his hands, and looked as if he was about to cry. "Disarming spells only," shouted Lockhart. "Let's try that again. Weasley, give your wand here." Weasley handed over the halves of his wand. Lockhart spoke a quick reparo, and handed the wand back to Weasley. The wand now had a curious bend, and looked as if it would fall apart at any moment. At the other end of the room, Professor Snape was whispering in Draco's ear. Professor Lockhart," Weasley began. Lockhart ignored him. "Ready again? On 3. 1, 2, 3. Weasley tried an Expelliarmus, but the spell curled and twisted, spiraling into the floor 3 feet to Weasley's left. Draco, meanwhile, had conjured a large serpent which slithered around the room, frightening the students. Lockhart's attempt at dispelling the serpent catapulted the animal toward a group of Hufflepuffs, where it reared up threateningly near Justin Finch-Fletchy. "Stop!" shouted Harry. "Don't bite him." The serpent paused, then relaxed slightly. It wound itself into a tight coil, but left its head raised and staring at Harry. The room was absolutely silent. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then, Professor Snape stepped forward and dispelled the snake with a flick of his wand. "This meeting is adjourned," Professor Snape said. "Mr. Potter, I will see you in my office. Immediately." Professor Snape strode from the room. Harry had to jog to catch up. "Professor? What's wrong?" Snape said nothing and ushered Harry into the office. Snape shut and locked the door behind them. "You neglected to inform me that you are a Parselmouth," Snape said angrily. Harry didn't understand. "A what?" "A Parselmouth," Snape repeated. "The ability to talk to snakes. Why did you not inform me of this ability?" "I didn't know I could," said Harry. "I mean, I talked to a snake once before, but that was before I knew I was a wizard. Later, I figured it was accidental magic." Snape stared at Harry for several seconds, then sat down behind his desk. "Have a seat, Potter." Harry sat. "The ability to speak and understand Parseltongue is very rare among wizards," said Snape. "Because of the ignorance of much of the wizarding population, it is a skill widely associated with dark wizards. Though many dark wizards have been Parselmouths, not all Parselmouths become dark wizards. The ability to speak and understand Parseltongue is treated much like membership in Slytherin House, actually." Harry nodded his understanding. "Do you see why your dramatic revelation of this ability poses a problem?" Harry thought for a moment. "Yes. Because I'm in Slytherin and a Parselmouth, people are going to worry that I will turn into a dark wizard." Snape shook his head. "Potter, because you are in Slytherin and a Parselmouth, the general populace will assume that you already are a dark wizard. After all, if you were able to defeat the Dark Lord as a child, you must have powerful magic at your disposal." "But I'm not a dark wizard," said Harry. Snape brought his hands together on his desk. "Your problem is compounded by another curious circumstance. The second most famous Parselmouth of all time was the founder of our house, Salazar Slytherin. Like magic itself, Parselmouth is hereditary. Salazar Slytherin's ability was inherited by his progeny." Harry's eyes grew wide. "Then, am I the heir of Slytherin? But I haven't done anything." "I find it unlikely that you are the heir," said Snape. The Potters were a pure-blood family whose genealogy was known for several generations, and they were neither associated with Slytherin nor known to be Parselmouths. Your mother's family was not magical, for the most part, which you must have realized from living with your aunt. It is difficult to believe that you are the heir. Harry looked at the floor. You said that Salazar Slytherin was the second most famous Parselmouth of all time. Who is the most famous? The Dark Lord, said Snape. Harry continued looking downward. Snape stared at the boy for several seconds. Harry, finding friends among other houses is difficult for a Slytherin in the best of times. Certainly you should not expect to find any now, at least until the heir of Slytherin is found and the Chamber of Secrets is closed. I suggest that you seek comfort, and perhaps even protection, from your fellow Slytherins. Yes, sir. If you have questions regarding Parseltongue, please come to me. Misconceptions about Parselmouths abound, and I do not wish you to be misled. Yes, sir. Do you have any questions for me at this time, Mr. Potter? No, sir. You are dismissed, then. Harry stood to leave the room. As he was closing the door, Snape spoke up once again. Mr. Potter. Harry stepped back into the room. Yes, sir. Congratulations on your Quidditch victory. Thank you, sir. Harry flashed a wan smile, and closed the door behind him. Back in Slytherin, Harry went directly to his dormitory. Draco was there, waiting for him. Harry heaved himself onto his bed, and stared upward at the canopy. Harry. Draco's voice was quiet and tentative. Yeah. We're friends, right? Sure, Draco. Harry sighed as he spoke. He was tired. Why did all the awful things always happen to him? I mean, you're my best mate, right? Why wouldn't Draco let this drop? You tell me. You're my best mate, for what it's worth. Okay. Draco fell silent for several seconds. Earlier this year, when I was sort of saying that I was the heir of Slytherin, you know I didn't mean anything by that, right? Yeah, I know. I mean, I didn't want to step on any toes or anything. What are you on about? Harry rolled over and looked at his friend. Draco looked around. They were alone in the dormitory. Harry, I have to know. Are you the heir of Slytherin? What? No. Come on, Harry. You can tell me. I'm your best mate, you said so yourself. I'm not the heir, Draco. Then why didn't you tell me you were a Parselmouth? Why were you hiding it? I wasn't hiding anything. I didn't know it was a big deal. Muggle raised, remember. Of course it's a big deal, Harry. Some of the greatest wizards of all time were Parselmouths. I mean, Salazar Slytherin himself. Draco's voice was starting to become a little excited. I know all about it, Harry said bitterly, thinking of Voldemort. Snape told me after dueling club. Harry, I'll help you. You don't have to hide from me. We can clean up the school, together. We'll put all the Gryffindors and Mudbloods in their place. Draco. Harry leapt to his feet, hands clenched and fists at his sides. I'm not the heir. Can I be more clear? I am not the heir. Get it? Draco raised his eyebrows. Oh, he said. Right. I've got it. Of course you aren't the heir. Draco gave an exaggerated wink, and made a click with the side of his mouth. Seriously, Harry said. I'm not the heir. Right, said Draco. I'll tell anybody who asks. Not the heir at all. Harry threw his arms up and fell backwards onto his bed. Everything was hopeless. Chapter 8. Snape's prediction came to pass faster than Harry expected. The day after dueling club, while Harry was walking through Charms, he passed through a crowd of 6th-year Ravenclaws. As Harry walked by, he tripped and stumbled. Harry looked back at the Ravenclaws. Had that been intentional? The older students continued onward, walking and chatting. Maybe it was an accident. Or maybe not. It happened again later that day, with a mixed group of Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors. The next day, while Harry was washing his hands in the bathroom, a 4th-year Gryffindor pushed Harry against the sink. The Gryffindor apologized, but Harry was soaked with water. Harry tried to use a drying charm on his clothes, but was too flustered to get it right. He arrived late to herbology and Slytherin lost 5 points. The revelation that Harry was a Parselmouth was not without its advantages. In Slytherin, Harry was suddenly everybody's best friend. Several upper-year students had offered to bring Harry sweets and butterbeer from Hogsmeade, even though they had never spoken to Harry before. And some of them were girls. The Quidditch victory over Gryffindor had done wonders for his social standing, but Harry hadn't even considered that he might reach greater heights of popularity. Apparently, it was happening anyway. When Harry took his meals, for example, he was no longer restricted to sitting with Draco and Pansy. Not that Harry had ever felt restricted, he wanted to sit next to his friends. But now, as he approached the Slytherin table, there was a subtle shuffling, as his housemates shifted to create spaces in which Harry might sit. Harry caught several of the third-year girls casting hopeful looks his way, and whenever their eyes met his stomach did a little flip-flop. Deciding who to sit with was an awful amount of pressure, and Harry continued to sit with Draco and Pansy just to avoid having to choose among his other options. It sent his head spinning. But for all the benefits that Harry had suddenly discovered among his Slytherin housemates, there were 3 times as many students in the other houses, and every one of them seemed suspicious. 2 days after dueling club, on the way to defense, Harry's books were knocked out of his hands. The passing feet of older students trampled his parchment and books, and nearly crushed his fingers. By the time Harry had belongings collected, he was late to class. When Harry rushed through the door, Lockhart was extolling his virtues to Harry's classmates. "Ah, Harry," said Lockhart. "Just the man I was looking for. Come up to the front, I need your assistance." Harry slunk up to the front of the class. He turned and faced Lockhart, who was characteristically beaming. "Harry, you and I will demonstrate how I defeated the Wagga Wagga werewolf. I will play myself, of course, as your classmates would be unable to suspend their disbelief if I acted the part of the werewolf." Harry looked out over the class. The faces of the male students were, indeed, filled with disbelief, but not the sort that Lockhart intended. The girls were a completely different story, though. Each of the girls was sitting in approximately the same position, body leaned forward, head rested in hands, elbows placed the desk, vacant smile on face, periodic batting of eyes and wistful sighing. Harry couldn't understand why the girls hadn't seen through Lockhart's facade. The man was clearly a fraud. Lockhart knew as much about defense as the Cornish pixies he had released on the first day of class. "Harry? The Wagga Wagga werewolf." Harry sighed and hunched over his back. He held his hands up, limp at the wrist, fingers vaguely curled like claws. This was the 4th time that Harry had acted as the werewolf, and he was familiar with the process. "Woo," Harry said. "Come on, Harry. Let's have some enthusiasm. You're a terrifying beast." Harry's frustration bubbled over. He didn't want to be a terrifying beast. He wanted to sit in class and not be bothered. He was sick of being stared at, sick of Lockhart's incompetence, sick of being forced to act like a fool. He was sick of it all. Harry growled at Lockhart, letting the sound form deep in his chest. He held his curled fingers tightly, wondering how quickly Lockhart could stop him if he actually attacked. An image flashed into Harry's mind. Harry was clinging to Lockhart's back, reaching around to claw at Lockhart's eyes. Harry's lip lifted in an expression that was half sneer, half smile. "That's the spirit," said Lockhart. "Now, your daring professor and 7-time winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award pounced on the werewolf, like this." Lockhart leaped forward and placed a hand on Harry's shoulder. At great risk to himself, your heroic professor pushed the beast to the ground. Lockhart began to apply pressure to Harry's shoulder. Harry knew that he was supposed to fall back onto the ground, but he resisted. Why should he let himself get pushed around? He had been pushed enough for one day. Ahem. Lockhart cleared his throat. Your heroic professor pushed the beast to the ground. Lockhart applied more pressure. In response, Harry moved his feet slightly apart, setting himself more firmly against the force of Lockhart's hand. "Harry," Lockhart whispered, "that's your cue." Harry replied by snarling. Lockhart's smile faltered. "So that's how it is, then," Lockhart said quietly. "You think there's only room for one celebrity in this school?" Lockhart began pushing at Harry's shoulder with greater and greater strength. "Maybe you're right, Harry, but that celebrity isn't you." Harry stood firm against Lockhart, refusing to go down. Harry stared at Lockhart's eyes, focusing intently on his opponent. It was as if the rest of the classroom didn't exist. As if Harry was looking down a long, dark tunnel, with Lockhart at the end, and the tunnel was faintly tinged with green. Suddenly, Lockhart's wand was out and Harry felt a sharp sting in his leg. Harry collapsed to the floor and Lockhart stood over him, smiling triumphantly. "And that is how I used the home orifice charm to defeat the Wagga Wagga werewolf," said Lockhart. "Did you just jinx Harry?" shouted Draco. "Class dismissed," said Lockhart, suddenly cheery. "But there's almost an hour left in class," said Daphne Greengrass. Lockhart ignored her. Before anyone could say another word, Lockhart had breezed out of the classroom. Draco and Pansy rushed forward to Harry. Tracy Davis was just behind. The rest of the class, confused by what they had just witnessed, slowly packed their things and wandered out of the classroom. "He did jinx you, right?" asked Draco. Harry nodded. "Stinging jinx, right in the leg. But he was weak as kittens. He couldn't have pushed me down without it." "You should report him to Snape," said Draco, "and maybe my dad. Teachers aren't allowed to treat students like that. We could get him fired." "I don't want to make an enemy," said Harry. "People like Lockhart." Harry looked at Pansy as he said this. "What?" said Pansy. "He's pretty to look at. There's no fault in looking." "Whatever. A feud with Lockhart could ruin everyone's opinion of me," said Harry. "He feels like he won, so let's leave it at that. I've got enough problems without Lockhart hating me." "What do you mean?" asked Davis. "He means being a Parselmouth," said Draco. He rolled his eyes and Pansy nodded. "No, it's not that," Harry said. Harry was thinking of the pushing in the corridors. If it became public knowledge that he and Lockhart were fighting, the people taking potshots at Harry would grow bolder, at least around Lockhart. "Things have been happening to me." Harry was nervous about telling Draco and Pansy what had happened. He was ashamed that he hadn't been able to avoid the problem himself. "What sort of things?" asked Davis. Harry told them about the ordeal of the past 3 days. "It's nothing I can really put my finger on," said Harry. "I can't even say that anybody has really done anything wrong. But it's happening to me when it hasn't ever happened before." "Can't you just," Pansy waved her hand vaguely in the air, "avoid it? Like I did today. Stay late after every class, and show up late to the next one? I'll be losing points for Slytherin hand over fist." "Great solution." "Then stop trying to avoid it," said Davis. "You're thinking about it wrong. Don't avoid the problem, prevent the problem. Don't go anywhere without protection." "Yeah," said Draco. "From now on, you don't go anywhere alone. When we go to class, you walk between Pansy and me. When you go to the bathroom, I watch your back. Nobody can take a shot at you, because you're protected. And if anybody does," Draco smiled wickedly, "I'll make them regret it." "Thanks, Draco," said Harry. "Now, let's use that plan to get to lunch," Draco said. "I'm starving." The students stood and retrieved their books from their desks. As Harry picked up his books and school bag, he saw Tracy dart out of the room. Harry had wanted to invite her to eat lunch with him and Draco, but she was long gone by the time Harry entered the corridor. Draco's protection plan worked for several days. Harry still caught glares as he walked through the halls, but the older students had stopped overtly harassing him. The plan fell apart, however, when Draco and Pansy received detention from Professor McGonagall. They had transfigured a pair of books into spiders and were chasing Ron Weasley with them before class. When McGonagall arrived, the 8-legged books were crawling across Weasley's desk. McGonagall was not amused. Pansy and Draco were required to report to detention after dinner, which meant that Harry would be without his escorts. Harry insisted that he would be fine to walk back to Slytherin on his own. Pansy was worried, and Draco agreed. "You shouldn't take any chances," Draco said at dinner. "Why don't you ask Crabbe and Goyle to walk back with you?" "Draco, their idea of protection might get me killed. Have you seen how bad Goyle's aim is in charms?" "It's not about actions, Harry. It's about prevention. Nobody will come after you with those two around." Harry glanced down the table at Crabbe and Goyle. The two large boys were eating their dinners with an intensity that bordered on violence. Draco might be right, but Harry would rather have actual protection, not just perceived protection. "We can walk back with Harry," said a voice from Harry's other side. Harry turned and saw Daphne Greengrass leaning toward himself and Draco. Greengrass was sitting across from Tracy Davis, who was frantically waving her hands, trying to get Daphne to be quiet. When Tracy saw Harry looking, she pulled her hands back and sat on them, as if it was the only way to get them to stop moving. Her face flushed bright red. "Yeah, let's do that," said Harry. Crabbe and Goyle were good enough guys to chum around with, but on the whole Harry preferred Tracy and Daphne as company. Tracy and Daphne could make good conversation, Crabbe and Goyle could make offensive smells. And both Tracy and Daphne were much more competent with their wands. If tonight was going to set precedent for future alternate escorts, Harry would much prefer to have Daphne and Tracy around. Draco was skeptical. "I don't know, you seem like you'd be vulnerable." "So, the reason that people haven't been bothering me is because you're such an intimidating physical specimen." "Exactly." Draco raised his arm and acted as if he were flexing a muscle. Harry rolled his eyes. "I'll be fine," Harry said. At the end of dinner, Draco and Pansy reluctantly left Harry and went to their detention. Harry, Daphne and Tracy began their walk back to Slytherin. Conversation with Daphne was easy. Daphne was a talkative girl who was more than willing to share her opinion on a variety of subjects, regardless of whether the listener wanted her opinion at all. Harry was willing to let Daphne take the lead in conversation. It had been a hard week, and he found it relaxing to chat about the latest scandal from the Daily Prophet. Tracy said little, despite Daphne's attempts to draw her into the conversation. The blonde girl seemed consumed in her own thoughts. Harry certainly understood the feeling. "Thanks for doing this, by the way," Harry said to Daphne and Tracy as they approached the Slytherin common room. "It seems stupid, but—" "Move it, Snake." Harry and Daphne were shoved from behind. Daphne almost fell into a suit of armor, and Harry roughly bumped into Davis. They had been pushed by one of the beaters from the Hufflepuff Quidditch team, who was walking quickly away. "Hey!" Tracy had her wand out and was yelling at the Hufflepuff. The boy ignored Tracy, and Tracy started after him. "Hey, Hufflepuff!" Tracy fired a stinging jinx at the Hufflepuff, hitting him in the neck. The boy raised a hand to the back of his neck and turned around. By the time he completed his turn, Tracy was almost on top of him. Aguamenti. Water burst out of Tracy's wand with the force of a fire hose. The Hufflepuff was blasted off his feet and onto the floor of the corridor. He tried backing away from the jet of water, but Tracy kept advancing. When the Hufflepuff tried to stand, Tracy used the water to sweep his legs out from under him. "Nobody does that to Harry Potter," Tracy said loudly. "Do you want to stop her," said Daphne, "or should I?" "If you don't, I will," said a strange voice. Harry looked over. Cedric Diggory, one of the other players on the Hufflepuff Quidditch team, was standing next to him. "He has to learn a lesson," Harry said. "I think he gets the point," Diggory replied. Harry glanced down the hall. Tracy was almost on top of the boy, blasting him in the face with water. The Hufflepuff was scooting backwards on his hands, sputtering and gasping. He held up a hand to block the stream of water, trying to get a breath. Tracy leaned in and increased the power of her spell, blasting his hand backwards into his nose. "Everybody else needs to learn a lesson, too," said Harry. "I can't let this go on much longer," said Diggory. "Stop her, now, or I will." Harry said nothing, and continued to watch Tracy. The Hufflepuff beater again tried to stand, and Tracy again swept his feet from under him. Diggory raised his wand and opened his mouth. Before he could speak, Harry called out, "Davis! Let him go." Tracy looked back at Harry, but continued soaking the Hufflepuff. "You sure?" Harry nodded, and Tracy ended her spell. She turned back to the Hufflepuff and pointed a finger at his face. "Nobody pushes Harry Potter around. Ever." Tracy turned her back on the wet Hufflepuff and walked back to Harry and Daphne. "Thanks," said Harry, when Tracy reached him. Behind Tracy, Diggory was helping his teammate up off the floor. "I think I overreacted," said Tracy quietly. The screaming aggression was entirely gone. Davis seemed small, quiet, and somehow vulnerable. It was as if she had been the person attacked by a flood of water. Daphne put her arm around Tracy's shoulder. "Only a little," Daphne said. "You saw how long it took Diggory to intervene. If you were in the wrong, he wouldn't have let it go on so long. He would have been on you like a rabid badger." Tracy gave a small smile. "Maybe." Tracy said nothing else on the walk back to the common room. When they arrived, Tracy bolted to the girls' dormitory. "She's really self-conscious, you know," Daphne said to Harry. "Tracy? Why?" "She's always comparing herself to Pansy and feels like she doesn't measure up. Tracy feels like she needs to be some super social queen bee, but she just isn't that type of person. She's the type who has 2 or 3 very close friends, but not a lot of acquaintances." This seemed right to Harry. Tracy and Daphne were best friends, and he rarely saw one without the other. "Is that why Tracy is so awkward around me? Because she doesn't actually like me?" Daphne shook her head, and her dark black hair fell into her eyes. "No, Harry. Tracy's awkward around you because she wants to be your friend. Desperately. But she's managed to convince herself that you wouldn't want her. That's nuts. I like Tracy quite a bit. And I keep telling her that, but she won't believe me." Daphne sighed. "It would be really good for Tracy to have more friends, Harry. But trust me on this, you'll have to make the first move." Daphne glanced up at the dormitory. "I should probably go check on her. I'm going to be spending the rest of the night convincing her that she isn't a complete embarrassment." Good night, Harry. Chapter 9. I posted a bonus chapter on Wednesday. If you missed it, you should probably go back and read. Just saying. Harry was studying in the library during his free period when he heard whispering. He tried to ignore it, but his name was whispered one too many times. He closed his book with a sigh, and got up. He was going to give an earful to whoever it was. As Harry got closer to the whispers, he recognized the voice of Hannah Abbott, a pretty Hufflepuff in Harry's year. Harry stopped short, curious to know exactly what was being said about him. "You think Potter's the heir, then, Ernie?" said Hannah. "He's a Parselmouth, and that means dark wizard. Name one decent person you know who can talk to snakes." That was Ernie Macmillan, a second-year Hufflepuff. Harry was offended by Macmillan's statement. For one, Macmillan probably couldn't name any person he knew who could talk to snakes, other than Harry. For two, Harry was a decent person. So far, Filch's cat has been attacked, and Filch and Potter aren't on good terms. Filch isn't on good terms with anybody, Abbott pointed out. Ernie continued, ignoring her. Then, Creevey was attacked. He's in Gryffindor, and that was right after the Gryffindor-Slytherin Quidditch match. But Slytherin won the match, and Potter caught Katie Bell midair, Hannah said. "You mean, Potter caught a pure-blood midair in that match, and then petrified a Muggle-born wizard afterward," Ernie said. "But he seems so nice," Hannah said, now uncertain. "And he made you know who disappear, didn't he?" "Potter should have been killed that night," Ernie said, lowering his voice. "Only a dark wizard could survive a killing curse from you-know-who. And that's probably why you-know-who tried to kill Potter in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. Potter's been hiding that he was a Parselmouth all this time. He could be hiding loads of other dark powers." There it was. Exactly what Snape had told him would happen. Harry cleared his throat and stepped out from behind the bookshelf. When the Hufflepuffs saw Harry, they immediately fell silent. The blood drained from Ernie's face, leaving him a sickly shade of white. "So," said Harry, "you think I'm the heir of Slytherin?" "We're not scared of you, Potter," said Abbott. Her wand was in her hand at the side of the body. She was clutching it so hard her knuckles were white. "Good," said Harry. "There's no reason to be scared, because I'm not the heir." Harry turned to Macmillan. "And you're an idiot for thinking so." "I was there at dueling club," said Macmillan. "I saw you talk to that snake. I was telling it to stop. If you saw the snake, then you saw that it didn't attack Finch Fletchy. So you admit that you can talk to snakes." Harry rolled his eyes. "Wherever Finch Fletchy is, tell him he should be thankful that I stopped the snake." "Egdadon is more like it," said Macmillan. Harry scowled, and Macmillan began sputtering. I mean, I can trace my blood back through 9 generations of wizards and warlocks, I'll have you know." "Do you think that matters?" Harry asked. "Enemies of the heir should beware." "So you admit that you're the heir?" "I'm not the heir, you stupid Hufflepuff. But if you keep spouting off like you were a few minutes ago, the heir will hear you, and there won't be anything your great-great-great-grandmother can do to protect you." Harry spun and stalked back to his table. He grabbed his books and started stuffing them into his bag. Losing his temper hadn't done him any favors. Yelling at Hufflepuffs wouldn't do anything to convince people that he wasn't the heir. And listening to Macmillan blather on in complete ignorance was infuriating. Harry stormed out of the library, furious with himself, and furious with the Hufflepuffs. He needed to take his rage out on something. Maybe Draco would want to grab their brooms and some bats and knock a bludger around for a while. Delicious. Harry jerked to a halt. What was that? Blood, delicious blood. It was the same voice from the night of Halloween, but this time, there was nobody else in the hall. Where was that voice coming from? So hungry. The voice was fading. Harry broke into a sprint, chasing after it. As he rounded the corner, he struck something large and fell back onto his hands and knees. There was something sticky on his robes. Harry raised his hand and found that it was covered in blood. Harry looked up and locked eyes with Hagrid. "Harry? What are you doing, running in the halls like that?" Hagrid was carrying the bloody body of a dead rooster. The bird's neck had been slit. Harry paused, and listened in the silence. The whispering voice was gone. "Why are you carrying a dead rooster?" Hagrid lifted the bird. "Second one this year. Summit's been killin' 'em. I'm off to talk to Flitwick 'bout putting an alarm round the henhouse." Hagrid reached down and helped Harry off the floor. "Where were ye goin', anyway?" "Back to the common room. I got upset with some Hufflepuffs in the library." "Why's that?" They think I'm the heir of Slytherin, Harry said, looking down at the floor. Hagrid's face grew dark. I know you're not the heir, Harry. And, well, if you'd like to come down to my hut sometime, I'll tell ye a little more about it. Thanks, Hagrid. Harry looked up and smiled. Hagrid reached down and ruffled Harry's hair, then patted him on the back. Get along, then. And be careful. I know you're in Slytherin, but, be careful. Harry nodded, and he and Hagrid began walking in opposite directions. Harry intended to go back to the common room, eventually. Before he did, though, he wanted to see if he could find any trace of the mysterious voice. 2 minutes and 3 corridors later, he did. Harry stumbled upon the petrified body of Justin Finch-Fletchley. Next to Finch-Fletchley floated the motionless form nearly headless Nick, ghost of Gryffindor Tower. Harry clambered to his feet immediately. He couldn't afford to be seen by the bodies, or everyone would be convinced that he was the heir. But he couldn't leave Finch-Fletchley there on the floor. He had to tell somebody. Professor Snape. As Harry turned towards Snape's office, Peeves the poltergeist came roaring through the hallway, throwing eggs at doors. Peeves came to a halt directly in front of Harry. Does Potty Potter want an eggy egg? Peeves finally looked past Harry and saw the petrified forms on the floor of the corridor. Oh, Potty, what have you done? Attack. Attack. No ghost is safe. Run for your afterlives. Attack. Doors flew open along the corridor. Students poured into the hallway, shouting and yelling. The corridor became absolute chaos. Professor McGonagall was the first teacher out of her classroom. With military efficiency she began ordering students into classrooms, whether they belonged there or not. The hall cleared quickly, as none of the students wanted to be on the receiving end of McGonagall's wrath. Just as the last students were entering their classrooms, Macmillan and Abbott turned the corner at the end of the hallway. They could clearly see Finch-Fletchley's petrified body on the ground next to Harry. I knew it! Shouted Macmillan. Caught in the act. That will be quite enough, said McGonagall, coolly. I suggest that you find a better place to be, unless you wish me to create one for you in a detention. Macmillan and Abbott scurried away, and McGonagall turned to Harry. Your wand, please, Mr. Potter. But I didn't do anything. Nevertheless. This is out of my hands. Your wand, please. Harry reluctantly turned over his wand, and McGonagall tucked it away in her robes. Thank you. Now, follow me. Harry found himself in the headmaster's office. McGonagall had locked him there, wandless, while she went to search for Dumbledore. The shelves of the office were crowded with artifacts, the purposes of which Harry could only guess at. The spaces without magic relics were stuffed full of books. In the corner of the room sat a drab bird, whose every breath was an effort of heaving and huffing. Although Harry had nothing to do with the petrification of Justin Finch-Fletchley, he was certain that he would be expelled. Harry cursed Parseltongue, cursed prejudices, and cursed being sorted into Slytherin. He hadn't asked for any of it. Well, except for being sorted into Slytherin. Harry stared at the sorting hat, resting on a shelf next to the bird. The previous year, Harry had begged the hat to sort him into Slytherin, and the hat granted Harry's wish. A question thrust itself to the forefront of Harry's mind. Harry strode across the office and placed the hat on his head. Ah, Mr. Potter. I am glad to speak with you again, said the hat. The list of your exploits at Hogwarts grows quickly. Tell me, how has fame treated you? Poorly, thought Harry. He was more notorious than famous, at this point. Slytherin students had begun treating him with respect, but students from the other Hogwarts houses treated Harry as if he carried an exotic disease. You've been wondering if I put you in the right house, said the hat. Not really, thought Harry. Nonsense. Your father was in Gryffindor. Your mother was in Gryffindor. You didn't know it, but your godfather was in Gryffindor, as well. At the end of last school year, you boldly undertook a grand adventure and defeated Lord Voldemort himself. You recently rescued a young lady from mortal peril on the Quidditch pitch, foregoing an opportunity for personal glory and opening yourself to the anger of your peers. Clearly you are brave, courageous, and stout of heart. Harry was frightened by how clearly and deeply the sorting hat had seen his thoughts. Harry had been worrying about whether he had been sorted correctly, but had been scared to admit it, even to himself. So you put me in the wrong house. Sorting has very little to do with right and wrong, Mr. Potter. I stand by what I said, Slytherin will make you great. But great is not the same as good, is it? Cleverly put, Mr. Potter. And that brings us to the question you wished to ask me all along. When you sorted me, you said that there once was a wizard who was sorted into Slytherin, a dangerous wizard, and he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. Who was he? Mr. Potter, come now. If you're asking that question, you already know the answer. Voldemort. 50 years ago, Voldemort brought horror upon Hogwarts, a horror that none ever expected to witness again. And now we have you, Harry Potter. Harry Potter, the wizard who twice defeated Voldemort. Harry Potter, willing to do anything to get what he wants. Harry Potter, the Slytherin. Harry Potter, the Parselmouth. And now the Chamber of Secrets is open again. If I was the heir, if I was opening the Chamber of Secrets, I'd know it, wouldn't I? I'd have to know. Before the hat could answer, another voice spoke. Harry. Harry yanked the hat off his head. Professor Dumbledore stood in the doorway to the office, a curious look on his face. Hello, Professor, said Harry. Have you been enjoying your conversation with the Sorting Hat? I'm not sure, sir. Dumbledore nodded, then held out his hand. In it was Harry's wand. Professor McGonagall presented me with your wand. She is not quick to judgment, but she is a cautious woman and fast-acting when it is necessary. I would like to return your wand, Harry, because I do not believe you are a threat to this school. Dumbledore looked at Harry with his piercing blue eyes. Am I correct? Yes, sir. Harry met Dumbledore's eyes with a calm, level gaze. Good. Perhaps you can tell me, then, how you came upon the unfortunate Mr. Finch-Fletchy. Harry told Dumbledore everything. Well, almost everything. He left out the parts about hearing voices. Harry knew that, even in the wizarding world, hearing voices was a bad sign. When Harry finished his story, Dumbledore's response was almost immediate. It appears, Harry, that you are an unfortunate victim of circumstance. I'm not being expelled. Of course not, my dear boy. Dumbledore smiled. Hogwarts does not expel students lightly. Professor, Lord Voldemort opened the Chamber of Secrets 50 years ago, didn't he? Harry knew that Dumbledore often kept his own counsel on matters of importance. If Harry approached his question subtly, Harry figured that he would find himself artfully deflected from the subject. Shocking directness would, perhaps, be more profitable. Yes, Harry, he did. Score 1 for shocking directness. Then Voldemort is the heir of Slytherin, Harry said. I believe so, said Dumbledore. And that is why Voldemort is a Parseltongue, it's hereditary. Correct again, Harry. Then how can the chamber open now? Asked Harry. Dumbledore smiled. Harry, I am unfortunately unaware of both the location of the Chamber of Secrets and the manner of its opening. You are welcome to think on the subject, but please do not allow it to drive you to distraction. Sir, if I can ask, why can I speak to snakes? Professor Snape said that the ability to speak and understand Parseltongue was hereditary, but he also said that neither of my parents' families were Parselmouths. Dumbledore regarded Harry with twinkling eyes. You are quite perceptive, Harry. You do credit to your house. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that you would not ask that question. Harry recognized that Dumbledore had not answered his question. He said nothing, waiting for Dumbledore to continue. The headmaster sighed. It is my belief, Harry, that your ability to speak to snakes comes from Voldemort himself. You are quite unique, in that you are the only individual to have survived the killing curse. I cannot be certain, but my current theory is that the magic involved in your survival also transferred some portion of Voldemort's power to you. Perhaps, rather than being affected by the spell, you absorbed the spell. You mean he put a piece of his magic inside me? Yes. But please, do not dwell upon this. Magic does not make the man, as we often say. Harry nodded, and Dumbledore smiled. On to more pleasant matters, then. I would like to introduce you to my phoenix, Fawkes. Today is his burning day, and if I am correct. As Dumbledore spoke, the bird burst into flames. Harry backed away and held up his hands. Because Fawkes is a phoenix, he will be reborn out of his ashes. As Harry watched, a small, wrinkled, newborn bird poked its head out of the pile of ashes on Dumbledore's desk. Phoenixes are fascinating and beautiful creatures, Harry. They are nearly immortal. As I said, today is Fawkes' burning day, which means that, you see Fawkes in his eldest and youngest forms. Thus, Fawkes's best qualities are not on display. What do you mean, better qualities? Immortality seemed rather unbeatable to Harry. Dumbledore's smile dropped, slightly. Phoenix tears have unsurpassed healing powers, and are able to bring a person back from the brink of death. A phoenix is highly intelligent, enormously faithful, and terrifically strong. He sounds wonderful, Harry said. Thinking about Fox reminded him of Hedwig. When he was free, he would go up to the owlery and give her some treats. Indeed, he is. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment as he contemplated the newborn phoenix. Harry, is there anything else you wish to tell me? Anything at all? No, sir, Harry said. Which was true. There wasn't anything else he wished to tell Dumbledore. Harry would rather stay silent about the strange whispers in the hallway.